Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this relaunch event of CHERN, the China and Europe Research Network, which is titled China-Europe Relations in a Polarizing World, What Now for Research, Policy and Action? I'm Nana de Graaf. I'm an associate professor at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and I'm also the chair of CHERN. And I'm very pleased to introduce today's packed afternoon program. Before I will be handing over to our distinguished speakers, who will be introduced by Professor Jeffrey Henderson, Emeritus Professor of International Development at University of Bristol, and also CHERN's Vice Chair. And Jeff will be moderating the roundtable discussion. We can maybe move now to the program. Next slide. Thank you. So as many of you know, CHERN was established as a cost action with financial support of the European Union. And in that period, we built a large cross-European interdisciplinary community of scholars and practitioners working on Chinese increasing presence and engagements with Europe and its economic, societal, political and policy implications. And through this, CHERN became the platform for knowledge exchange about China in Europe among academic and non-academic communities. And I'd like to thank everyone here and not here who helped build CHERN in these past 5 years. Today, we proudly launched the CHERN publication called Challenges, Achievements and Plans for the Future, which synthesizes those collective achievements as well as challenges and plans ahead, with many thanks to our CHERN core group members and our CHERN communication manager, Jelena Gledic, who brought all this together into a concise, accessible, and very richly sourced publication, which I warmly recommend. But rather than us presenting this publication, which we are very proud of, we thought it would be much more interesting to invite 3 eminent experts from both academia and policy research to reflect on the report based on their own expertise and experience. So this will form the basis of our upcoming roundtable discussion, which is the first part of today's program. The second part of today's event, after a short break, will be dedicated to introducing to you CHERN's renewed management structure and also our new working modalities, and to share with you the plans that we have for the future, which will be followed by an interactive brainstorm and exchange with the participants in separate breakout rooms with the different working group leaders as chairs of those breakout room sessions. So that's the plan for today. Some housekeeping rules, you're all familiar to this, but still, you are very welcome to join the conversation and the exchange during the interactive parts of this program. And you can indicate that you have a question or a comment by using the raise hand function in Zoom, or you could put a remark or a question in the chat, but then please wait and keep your mic off until the moderator will hand you the floor to pose your question or comment. We will also be recording the parts of this event that are not interactive, but we'll switch off the recording in those interactive exchanges with the audience so that you can speak freely. With that, I now hand over to Jeff to introduce our speakers and moderate the roundtable discussion, which I very much look forward to. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Nana. Before I begin, I should perhaps tell people that I have a cold, and although I've dosed myself up with various chemicals, if you hear me coughing and sneezing, I apologize, beforehand, but hopefully things will be okay. Anyway, I'm Jeff Henderson, an emeritus professor at the University of Bristol in the United Kingdom and vice chair of CHERN. Before I introduce our 3 panelists, I'd just like to say that in reflecting upon CHERN's summary publication, which Nana mentioned, we asked each of them to focus their reflections around 3 questions. Firstly, what are the substantive themes, challenges, and opportunities for the China and Europe research community, both academic researchers and policy researchers? Secondly, what can be the added value of knowledge exchange for the future of China-Europe studies and China-Europe relations? And thirdly, how can CHERN continue to contribute effectively to this evolving field? The three panelists are three colleagues that are going to address these questions in their own ways, of course. Are first of all Li Xing, who splits his time between China and Denmark. In China, he is a Yunshan leading scholar and a professor at Guangdong University of Foreign Studies in Guangzhou. And in Denmark, he is a professor at Aalborg University. Secondly, Sarah Eaton, who is a professor at Humboldt University in Germany and a co-founder of the Berlin Contemporary China Network. And thirdly, Floris, who's the executive director of Leiden University's Asia Center, of course, Leiden in the Netherlands. All of them are leading experts on China and have a range of expertise on various aspects of global China also. So Professor Li will begin, and so I hand the floor over to him. Hello?
Yes, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Xing Li, you are still muted.
Sorry. So you can see the slides and my voice. You can hear my voice.
We hear your voice, but we still can't see the slides.
The slides.
Yes, we see them.
Okay. The slides is okay now? Okay, good. Okay, thank you, Jeff, for your introduction, and thanks, Nana, for your invitation. I actually didn't know CHERN until 2023 when Agoda actually invited me. So thanks for Agoda's invitation, and also Shelina. As Jeffrey just said, that I was also a professor at Aalborg University, but not anymore. I'm just a young professor in international relations, which means that Aalborg University still keep my relationship, but not the position anymore. I cannot keep two positions. I'm now right now I'm working for a think tank called Guangdong Institute for International Strategies, which is located in Guangdong University Foreign Studies. And I'm the director of European Research Center. And Nana, in her email, she posted three very important questions. That's exactly what I think this conference should discuss. I have read the report, but I'm not going to go through the report because I'm not an expert in every 5 groups. But I have a lot of experience and a lot of thinking, a lot of analysis, and a lot of feedback I want to share with you. In order to answer the 3 questions which were posted by Nana, and I didn't answer them in a way that one by one, but you can see that my analysis were somehow intertwined in my presentation. If we look at the CHERN, I don't know, Nana called it CHERN, but I call it CHERN. Okay, so just say that CHERN. That the period of CHERN, I'm saying the existing period CHERN was November 2019 to 2024. Basically, it was a pandemic period. So most of your activities were online. I can see a lot of activities online, but that was the situation. But during this period, very unfortunately, a lot of things happening, which actually shrink China-EU relations. First is the EU's strategic outlook 2019, which labeled China as the systemic rival. Okay, systemic rival, which changed the concept of China as a partner or as a collaborator. Second, the pandemic. Third is the Xinjiang issue, which actually suspended EU-China investment agreement. And the fourth is Ukraine war, which even distant relation between China and the European Union because of China's relationship with Russia. And finally, the US-China rivalry. And this has put EU-China relations in the really lowest level, I think, that European Union countries all have very they complain a lot against China's relation with Russia, and they even believe without China, Russia could not sustain the war. So if I read the report, and I could see CHERN has some kind of self-identified position, role, and contribution, especially page 27 to 33. CHERN wish to play a role in which it can impact on IR, public policy, global governance. It wants to raise people's play a role in people's diplomacy, IR second channel they call it, okay, and also join produce ideas, debates, topics that can influence the mass, and even that CHERN wants to also perhaps transform to becoming a think tank, play a think tank role and policy recommendation. And lastly, knowledge dissemination. If you read, you can see it on different pages. It's clearly stated. But now the substantial question raised to CHERN is, will CHERN remain as academic community network? Because according to my knowledge, until so far it is an academic community network, okay, or whether really CHERN wants to play a think tank role or generate policy impact. That's something else. That needs something else, okay. But currently, if I understand, generally speaking, that China-Western relations is that the West is closing the door for cooperation and engagement. But China is not. I'm going to give you some information later on. China is not actually, on the contrary. Okay? If you look at EU-China problems to be resolved, okay, if you really want to strengthen Europe and China, EU-China relations, these are the problems which hanging, floating on the sky, and we have to deal with it in one way or another. Which first is the so-called deglobalization and reglobalization, decoupling, de-risking. These kind of contradictions which very often echoed from the European side. Now the EU-China EV problems and Biden's sanctions against Russia, against China, and now Trump. We don't know Trump's policy, but he talks a lot about tariffs and also forcing NATO to increase its budget for defense, etc., etc. First is a general picture. It's a problem. Second, you see that as I said, the door is closing. More or less, Confucius Institute everywhere in Europe are closed, more or less. Okay, in my university, they closed it 2019. China studies, Chinese language studies and culture studies are also closing. I heard that the Copenhagen University closed the last Chinese teaching language program, and this program has moved to Aarhus University. So they perhaps want to gather all China studies in one university. I don't know. And also in your report, you mentioned NIRS. But NIRS has been closed. So this is a very sad situation. CSC scholarship is a big problem because most of Chinese, activities, or most of the Chinese scholars, when they come to Europe, whether it's researchers, students, they are most sponsored by CSC, okay, China Scholarship Center. And due to the confrontations between EU and China on this issue, and I don't know how this issue can be resolved, but I think I heard that CSC is engaging in discussing, in finding a way out with the European countries. And also there is a blacklist. In Europe, there is blacklist. In my university, when they admit students, they have to see whether the student coming from the list. It's very sad is that even Renmin University, Renmin University is one of the leading universities in China. It's Beijing University, Tsinghua University, Beijing University, Fudan University, Renmin University. Renmin University is ranking around the 5th and 6th. It's even social science university. It's not even science and technology university. And why this university is on the blacklist, I really don't know. I asked some experts in China. They say because they educate high-ranking officials in China. So I really don't understand. and the declining interest of China studies in many countries because of the high politics and serious obstacles in scholarly exchanges. And I heard a lot of Chinese colleagues told me that when they apply for, affiliations in Europe or United States, most answers are negative. So this is very, very bad. So the problems that, as I see that somehow because I came to Denmark very early, even before the end of the Cold War, I came to Europe in '88. So I could see that Europe or West, generally speaking, their confidence reached to the highest point after the Cold War. But now somehow the confidence is really declining. And I really don't understand why that suddenly that the confidence in the West is declining to such a low point. And China somehow had a very low confidence since the end of the Cold War, but now somehow the Chinese confidence is rising. And because the Chinese believe that the time is on its side. For example, visa-free. I will tell you the story about visa-free later on. Visa-free, now China say, okay, in order to counter all this, negative propaganda against China, the best way is to give Europeans visa-free, so they can come here and judge by themselves. Okay, so Chinese universities and research institutions, they still receive, generally speaking, very good funding, and I have also very good funding here in my research institute. In my research institute, for example, they demand all PhD students who must have 3 months experience in Western Europe or in Europe before they can graduate. So you can see they still push Chinese scholars to go abroad. Okay. So I think that the EU has to accept as China it is, not as it should be. I think that one of the obstacles, according to my long stay in Europe, is that the Europeans, including the Danes, they have the kind of also Americans. They have the kind of belief that what kind of China it should be. Okay, so what China it is today is against the expected China that it should have been. Okay, so you can see actually now that the high-ranking official in EU, Barros, he actually said very clearly that even Europe and China have different political systems, and they must cooperate. And also Jack Sullivan also pointed a few years ago that U.S. now has stopped trying to transform China, and also Kurt Campbell also has said same thing. Even Catherine Tai, who was very tough on Chinese trade, and she said that China has very effective alternative economic model. She said this in European Union, one of the conferences. Even Raimondo, she was so hawkish to China in terms of sanctioning Chinese high-tech companies. He even holding, now she said, okay, so sometimes it's very strange that when officials are getting to be retired or stopped as an official, then they begin to say something very honest, very true. She said that the holding back China in chips race is a fool's errand. So
Professor Lee, hi. Could you, we're trying to keep the presentations fairly short to maximize the Q&A. So can you wind up your comments pretty quickly, please?
So what I think that we can do is that CHERN should maybe do some up-to-date knowledge on China research, especially that on this policy implications. For example, we can do some proposal submission. EPC has a lot of collaborations with China, so we can maybe borrow some of their strengths. A good example is that EPC was here in Hangzhou. I was there, so I had very good exchange with EPC for people. Okay, and also one information is important is that in China they began to install region and country-based research instead of discipline-based, which means that before we have international relations, then we have country-based studies under international relations, but now it's upside down. They install what they call regional and country-based studies. Then they study international relations, trade, or etc., etc. So this is just I want to tell you that China actually begin to invest much more knowledge, time, and invest much more on regional studies, on European studies, on each countries, rather than on general disciplines.
Okay.
Okay, this is the last one.
Can we sort of finish at that point? Actually,
okay, so the last point is that we can this year in 2025 is EU-China 50 years anniversary. So perhaps I propose that we can do something together. And Euro-China Center has already proposed something with my institute. So I want to have a chance to join, if it is possible. Okay, so I just make this point. I finished. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. That was very helpful, very useful. Okay, next is Professor Sarah Eaton. Sarah, please go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Let me start with the same apology as Jeff did. I'm also feeling under the weather, and so if you see me grabbing from my wombat mug to drink tea, that's the reason. Yeah, thank you so much to the organizers for the invitation. I'm a great admirer, along with many of the CHERN network, and when I read the very, very impressive report, I can't help but be deeply impressed by what you've achieved since in a short period of time. Maybe that's a segue into a little bit of explanation about what I think motivated the invitation for me to join this conversation, which is that I am the co-founder, as Jeff mentioned in his introduction, of the Berlin Contemporary China Network. And in some ways, if CHERN is the gold standard of networking on China-Europe issues in Europe, we're trying to do some similar things, but on a much more local scale. So the BCCN was set up in summer of 2021. Also, the context of the pandemic played a big role here. And our immediate sort of modest goal was simply to create and foster a sense of community among the relatively large number of China-focused scholars with a social science orientation, both junior, so-called junior and senior scholars in and around Berlin. That this would be an opportunity for us to sort of, profile our community a little bit better, and also to do things like joint lecture series and workshops. And we were operating on that basis for a couple of years quite successfully. And then we're fortunate to get some funding from the Federal Ministry of Research and Education to take things up a little. And so since the spring of last year, we're very fortunate to have a coordinator, Merla Gruneweg, who is somewhere in the audience today. Hello, Merla. And since then, we've been able to achieve some more ambitious goals. Now we're focusing on creating really community and trying to support young up and coming scholars within Berlin. We have something called the Studying Global China Workshop twice yearly. The first one took place in November, an opportunity for docs and postdocs to come together and exchange about their research. We are also cooperating with the Mercator Institute for Chinese Studies on an annual debate format related to sort of big China questions. And that first debate format took place also in November on essentially the future of China-Europe relations, especially in the context of Trump 2.0. And we're also launching a series of policy dialogues. So something much more small scale in comparison to what CHERN is doing, but we are interested in doing some similar things. And definitely, CHERN is a major example for what we're doing. So the way that I approached these questions was to sort of take them sequentially. So I'll just talk you through some of the points here. Question number one, what are the substantive themes, challenges, and opportunities for the China-Europe research community, both in academia and policy contexts? Well, from my perspective, you've covered really a lot of the ground here with your working group. So the economic relationship with Europe, how to balance risks and opportunities, de-risking, de-leveraging. Professor Lee talked about this as well. Especially in the looming beginning of Trump 2.0 and a possible reset, another reset of Europe-US relations. adding some sort of stability to economic relations with China is likely to be more important. And then, of course, and that's covered very, very well within your working groups. And then a second related kind of overlapping question, that is, how do firms, governments, universities, how should they position themselves on questions of cooperation with Chinese partners regarding sensitive tech questions? This is also something that Working Group 3 is working really, really well on. In my own research on China's role in standard setting for digital technologies, this is an extremely pressing topic that practitioners face on a kind of daily basis. And they are really, really hungry for really empirically informed scholarly insights and questions like this. So you guys are really filling a demand here. Another issue that we at BCCN don't address nearly enough, and I also think it's somewhat absent from the CHERN agenda, is the question of security issues, right? So what role can Europe play in preserving peace and stability in East Asia? This becomes also more pressing given the new uncertainty in US politics. So we had a German naval patrol in the Taiwan Strait last year. We tend to think of Europe as not particularly relevant to security issues. But I think that this will become more important in the coming years, again, because of this new uncertainty. So maybe that's something to think about paying attention to as well. So many of these questions are of interest to both scholarly and policy communities, but I also tend to think that we as academics, at least, also have a responsibility to kind of resist any kind of easy, simplistic, homogenous framing of China that comes to us from policy and media fields, for example. When people present China as either an opportunity or a threat, well, the answer is, of course, both and neither. And what China are we talking about, right? We're talking about the state, right? The state itself is immensely complex and immensely heterogeneous. Are we talking about the central level? Are we talking about the party as a distinct element of the state, right? This is infinitely complex. Are we talking about firms, right? State-owned enterprises have their characteristics, and hybrid firms are another story entirely. Or are we talking about the 1.4 billion people living there, right? So taking the opportunity to challenge really simplistic and homogenizing sort of representations of China, I think, is really important. My colleague at the Max Planck Institute of Social and Cultural Anthropology, the very famous Chinese anthropologist Xiang Biao, talks about the need to tell lots of diverse stories about China as an effort to kind of resist this othering of China that happens in so much of public discourse today. And I tend to agree that that's really, really important. So in this regard, I'm really happy that one of the things that we're doing at the BCCN since the arrival of Mela Gruneweg, who happens to also be a specialist in film, is now creating awareness about the arts, and particularly Chinese cinema through our network. So in Berlin, we have a major diaspora community of artists and filmmakers who now are contributing to making Berlin still, one of the major global centers of the arts. And so I think highlighting kind of these softer, sort of more alternative stories about China and Europe is actually really important, again, to challenging the dominance of these reductive and dangerous China threat narratives. So that's something that I think about a lot too. These opportunities to tell kind of offbeat alternative stories about global China that in the end really kind of do make a difference.
Sarah, could you wrap up in maybe a couple of minutes, please? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That'll be easy. What's the added value of knowledge exchange for the future of China-Europe studies and Europe-China relations? I think that at the moment, one of the big inspirations, as I mentioned, for setting up the BCCN was that one felt quite viscerally during the pandemic, particularly from people working on doctoral degrees, that they felt, just completely at a loss. How do I continue my doctoral research when I actually can't get to the region to collect data? And so, creating some sort of networks within, a deepening community within the context of this polarizing world that you guys are talking about strikes me as really, really important. And then also what Professor Lee was talking about, the real urgency in the context of these rising barriers in the education world across universities between China and Europe. Using these networks as an opportunity to maintain and deepen our connections with colleagues in the region is really, really important, right? As Professor Lee was talking about, some of the decisions that are being made about who's on the blacklist are utterly arbitrary. Renmin University is a absolutely first-rate academic institution, and it doesn't make sense for policymakers to be deciding arbitrarily about who gets in and who doesn't. And so, within this context of not only challenges within China in the context of the new changes that have been introduced under Xi Jinping, but also increasing barriers within Europe, I think that the way that we can leverage our networks to deepen and maintain connections with our colleagues in China is really, really important. Good. I had a couple other things here today to say, but I'll wrap it up. Two other final thoughts about how CHERN can continue to contribute effectively in this evolving field. I think that I wish you guys all the success in big future, I hope they're planned funding proposals, because I can imagine that you have a real great platform here for creating sort of Europe-wide graduate program on China and Europe topics. I think that could be really, really exciting. And then if you had, a pot for resources to actually fund CHERN-defined research projects, I think that would be amazing as well. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Sarah. That was a very good contribution. Now over to Dr. Floris Harm for his thoughts. Floris,
yeah,
floor is yours. No more than 10 minutes, please. Yeah.
Yes. I will definitely
max,
say. Yeah, shouldn't be a problem. I will try to keep it within that time frame. First of all, super honored to be part of this roundtable. I was mentioned as a China expert. I'm not really sure whether I actually am. I did study Chinese when I was a lot younger, and after that I became a journalist and freelanced in Beijing as a correspondent for print and radio media, and then moved into Dutch public broadcasting for radio and television. From there, I moved a year and a half ago to head the Leiden Asia Center as the executive director. So I'm not a doctor or a researcher or a professor by any way, shape, or form, but I'm very happy to be here. There's for the sake of time, only two points that I'd like to share. First is and it's a challenge and an opportunity. I think the first is the need for a better public debate, and secondly, there's this fragmentation of the knowledge and research agendas that also needs to be confronted within Europe, and perhaps there is a Dutch experience that may offer some guidance here. And I'm going to abuse this opportunity to describe the Leiden Asia Center, which may also provide some food for thought in terms of what are the key issues or key themes to focus on for the future. So originally, Leiden Asia Center was set up as a independent knowledge center that has the goal to connect academic research and researchers to the outside world, in particular government, politics, business, and media. So in that sense, perhaps somewhat similar to CHERN, although a lot smaller. And it was set up from within the university because Leiden Asia Center has been a knowledge hub of Asia knowledge, not just on China. And so the Leiden Asia Center also doesn't just focus on China, but also on other big players in the region, such as India, Indonesia, Japan, and Korea. And of course, a lot of the themes there are often in relation to how China is behaving in the region and how the rest of the world is responding to that. We do research, and as far as themes are concerned, the current research agenda focuses on this regional reordering that is going on, technological transformations and evolving environments, as it's called, so the environment. We also do a lot of events, often public events, often engaging a large audience. and we give trainings and courses, and we have a presence in the media. And I'll talk about that later, about the media presence. But every time we try to show the relevance of academic insights and research to parties outside academia. And again, in that sense, we may have similar goals to CHERN. So I've been here now in this position for a year and a half, and I've noticed a couple of things when dealing with universities, but also with policymakers. And one thing I've noticed is that there seems to be a real disconnect between regional expertise and academia on the one hand, and on the other hand, the decision makers, whether they are in government or in business, and that's not great, I would say. What is great, I think, is or has really surprised me, is that there is a huge curiosity among policy people in the various ministries here in the Netherlands to find out what is really going on. So just a quick example, a few years back, there was a discovery of a police station in Rotterdam, set up by the Chinese, run by the Chinese police. So of course the gut reaction is to really sort of go like, well, it's a terrible thing. The research question was, how does the Chinese police actually operate? What is its remit, regionally, locally, nationally, and internationally, to see, you know, what could be behind this thing. So there's a huge hunger for knowledge and a curiosity. However, the curiosity doesn't really seem to translate or exist, at least much less among politicians and MPs, and they generally sort of decide the debate in the Netherlands. And as far as the debate is concerned, this is actually something I've noticed ever since I started studying Chinese back in the Stone Age. I've noticed that the debate around China is always very emotional, and a cool-headed, rational or dispassionate approach is hardly ever taken, whether it's when China is seen as the big opportunity or when China is seen as the big threat. It's never very rational and cool-headed, it seems, and therefore perhaps the way we view China says more about us than about China itself. So the two things that I wanted to say: the need for a better public debate, to kind of improve the public debate. I think the voice of experts in the media and the public debate needs to be a lot bigger, to add nuance and knowledge. And Leiden Asia Center tries to do this in two ways. First of all, we've started a media training and the second thing is op-eds. The media training, first of all, we did a workshop end of last year for our researchers and academics, because the media can be a very strange and scary beast, and not everybody is comfortable talking to them. So we also invited journalists, managing mutual expectations and so on. And for this, I was actually inspired by a great workshop that was organized early last year by CHERN. So that was really helpful for that. And the second strategy, if you like, is op-eds, which allows academics and researchers to, let's say, control the message and not have your 15-minute interview reduced to a 15-second quote, which happens to be the one bit that you didn't think was that important. So we've been encouraging researchers to write op-eds and engage the public in that way, adding, again, nuance and knowledge to the debate. So that's the first thing. And the other challenge, if you like, is the fragmentation of knowledge and research agendas, which, as far as China is concerned, is probably a common problem in many countries, as well as in Brussels. And in the Netherlands, they tried to do something about that by setting up the China Knowledge Network. And Leiden Asia Center is closely involved with that. So the China Knowledge Network acts as let's say, a matchmaker between supply and demand. Demand side being 12 government ministries. So let's say finance, infrastructure, defense, agriculture, and so on. And the supply side is the 200+ researchers and experts database in the Netherlands. And in the middle is the Secretariat, and that is run by the Foreign Office, by Leiden Asia Center and Klingendahl Institute. And that Secretariat brings those two sides, the supply and demand side, together in an interdisciplinary approach, which has led to 40 research papers on policy-related questions. And the cool thing is that a project needs to get the buy-in from ideally 3 government ministries, thereby avoiding the fragmentation of knowledge and research agendas. So
Floris, can you wrap up
leave it
with
at
what
that.
you
That's my 2 cents. And again, look forward to the Q&A. Thanks so much.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much, Floris, and to all of our panelists. So it's now over to everyone else, I guess.
Welcome back, everyone, after what was a very engaging and intensive roundtable, not only on what CHERN has achieved, but also making clear the mounting challenges ahead, as well as offering us as a community some great recommendations for what the added value of a knowledge network like CHERN can be. With, again, many, many thanks to our brilliant speakers and the thought-provoking insights also from the audience. We will now move to what CHERN wants to do and how we will be organized in the near future. And I think we can move to the next slide for that. You have seen the program enough by now, I think. So we will continue to be led by what's now called a steering group, which will, and you can see it on the slide there, which will consist of the working group leaders, Agnes Tsunomar for Working Group 1, as you have been used to, Tim Rühlich, who will continue to lead Working Group 2, but with a slight twist, Nicholas Jepson, who will be handing over the leadership for Working Group 3 and establish a new working group on energy resources and transition, Agota Revesh, who will be leading Working Group 4, and Martina Bofulin as the new working group leader of Working Group 5. Paul Nieri, who was leading that working group, and also Anna Lupina Wegner, who was in charge of managing the training school activities, have left the CHERN leadership, and we are extremely grateful for their enormous contributions to our network, and we'll try to manage without them now in the future. Myself and Jeff will continue as vice chairs. Alexandra will remain our network manager, and Jelena Gledic our communication manager. We are also very pleased to have welcomed Professor Giles Mohan from Open University in the UK on board of our steering group as our strategy and resource manager. The working groups will continue to initiate events such as online events, roundtables, workshops, media briefings, also suggesting conference panels and publication proposals. And we also very much welcome our members to not only actively participate in those activities, but also to propose activities themselves. We do not have any funding at the moment. And because of that, we'll have to generate funding for all our initiatives if needed on a case-by-case basis. In addition, we will, as a steering group, continue to actively develop funding acquisition strategies, and some of our speakers already also suggested some great avenues there. And we also invite you to let us know if you have any concrete ideas or proposals to that end. Basically, CHERN's main aim for the future is to remain an inclusive and diverse platform for knowledge exchange that supports our community of scholars on China-Europe, broadly speaking, as much as we can. And we invite you to employ it as such. Use this platform. In addition to all of this, we are also seeking collaborations with other networks. Some of them have already been mentioned, the China Knowledge Network, but also Reconnect, China Horizons, Coimbra, Eurohub for Sino, and Cosmolab are examples of such collaborations. And again, if you have ideas or suggestions, we are very open to explore those avenues. Now, to fill you in on all these details of the working groups and our upcoming activities, and also to start the brainstorm, which we'll have in separate breakout rooms, I will now hand over to my fellow steering group members, and they will each hand over to the next speaker. So I will hand over to you, Giles Mohan. You're muted.
Sorry, muting myself. Yeah, thanks, Anna. Very grand title, but as a big CHERN fan, I was delighted when I got invited to be on the steering group. So a couple of things that I'm quite keen to do in this role. First of all, is to sort of identify strategic areas and catalyze learning across the working group. So we heard today, for example, from Professor Lee about kind of this idea of de-risking, which we're all familiar with. You know, I think this raises important questions around sectoral interdependencies, relationships between governance, technology, and infrastructure. So all things that the working groups are doing, I guess, are there ways we could think about working across those working groups to address that issue that would be greater than the sum of the parts? So what I want to do is to sort of try and help that process. I can't do it single-handedly, but obviously that would be part of my remit. And I think something else I'm personally guilty of is we get kind of very embedded in our own research. So we get kind of very focused, and you kind of sometimes miss the big picture issues. And so we've heard about the kind of polarizing global economy at the moment, but China's only one part of that. So I think, you know, how do we kind of also bring in kind of questions about the rise of the Gulf states, the new scramble for some African rare earths, for example, and now we've heard in Greenland, you know, Donald's going to invade Greenland to get some rare earths. So, you know, there's a whole set of issues I think that CHERN has to be addressing beyond just China-Europe relations, I think, is the thing. And only can we do that through thinking across working groups. That's part of what I'd like to do. And the other one is something to pick up on something that Sarah mentioned, is around funding. I think we don't want to get obsessed with funding, would be my argument. You kind of, if you get worried about funding rather than intellectual curiosity, you get kind of down a bad rabbit hole, really. Having said that, the cost action was a very generous funding source, and I'll never forget sipping champagne on Inalco's terrace. I don't think we're ever going to match that level of funding. We may do. Let's aspire. But what I want to do as part of that brief of dipping into the different working groups is to sort of help to see if we can identify funding sources. So Sarah mentioned one thing we have been discussing is a possible Marie Curie doctoral training network, which would bring in various CHERN members. Hopefully we can get that going this year. Some of these will be CHERN-wide topics, others will be more specific. I know this doesn't obviously prevent individuals or groups from leading bids, but throughout, and really want to emphasize what Sarah said, I think it would be stupid not to leverage the value of CHERN as an international and interdisciplinary network in whatever bids we put in, either as a whole network or even if it's 2 or 3 people within CHERN, not somehow leveraging CHERN as a selling point for their own bids. So I think it's that kind of dialogue that I'd like to get going. So what do I need? Invite me to everything. I'll try and make as much as I can. I want to listen to what people are doing, soak it all up, and then try and reflect back in some way. I'm not saying that I'm the only person that can do this, obviously, but that's what I've been charged to do. So I'll do my best. And obviously, if you have ideas about funding, do come and chat. Happy to chat on Teams, however. Thank you very much.
I think it's my turn now, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, good. I'm in charge of communications. Thank you so much, Giles, and thank you, Nana, and thank you everyone for joining. It's very exciting to have such a large number of people from our community to join us today. And I want to tell you a few words about what I'll be doing in the next chapter of CHERN. So it's building on what I did as science communication first manager and coordinator in the sort of cost division of labor. So I'm going to continue managing CHERN's public presence and image in coordination with the steering group. I will be there to assist any members who need any help with their communication strategy. That is how to better communicate their work with different audiences. And I also help facilitate communication within the network. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Alexandra. So our network is what we call the CHERN community, and we made this nice little infographic to sort of define what we mean by that. The CHERN community includes the steering group, and that's us presenting to you today what our ideas are and how we plan to move forward, and we communicate in our regular online meetings. We're also piloting some online work visualization software that can help us manage things as best as possible and have an overview of everything that's happening in CHERN. Then, of course, we have our working group members who actively participate in co-creating and implementing all the different working group activities. And the working group members will continue communicating as they have before in a way that the working group leader decides. We will continue having the LinkedIn group, and we ask everyone to join if they like. But we will also introduce a mailing list, a mailman mailing list, which will enable all the working group members across different working groups to communicate freely directly in a mailing list. And Alexandra will give you a few technical details about that in a minute as well. And of course, we have all those who follow our work, who can still subscribe to our regular news updates on our website. And of course, working group members can also subscribe to these kinds of updates. And there we will post all events that are open to not just working group members, but to the general public. As for our public presence, we will continue the communication strategy that we had thus far, which meant that with the resources that we have, we've had a lot of success in managing the sort of how much we go out into the public with the various very complex topics that we deal with in this polarizing environment that we discussed many times today. So we will not be opening new social media channels. We will be using the ones that we had up to now. We will also encourage our members to post on their personal social media networks. So the ChinaandEurope.net website is still the place to go for all news about CHERN. And with that in mind, I will hand over to Alexandra, who will tell us more about how to join if you haven't already and how to continue communicating with CHERN. Alexandra? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So if you are not a CHERN member yet, you can apply through our website, and you will be asked to fill out a form with some information about your research topic, your expertise, and your affiliation. Becoming a CHERN member means that you will join our growing network. Currently, we have about 300 members consisting of researchers and experts who all work on a topic that relates to the China and Europe topic. Becoming a working group member is free of charge, and the working group leaders will review the applications about once a month. Within CHERN, as said, we will use the CHERN LinkedIn group and the CHERN mailman email list as communication channels. And after you've been admitted, you will be invited to these two channels. Shortly on LinkedIn, working group members are invited after they become a working group member to the LinkedIn page, and there you can find and connect other CHERN members. And we ask you to share all your event invitations, publications, calls for papers or conference panels or other collaborations, relevant vacancies. And basically the rule is that everything is relevant to the CHERN community. Good to know is that the LinkedIn group is not public, so you need to have the link to become a member. And then the mailing list, so CHERN members who are subscribed to the mailing list, they can receive and send emails to the whole network. And the mailing list is hosted by the VU and is managed by Jelena Kledic and myself as network manager. And we are the ones who can add and remove new list members and resolve technical issues. So existing CHERN members will be added to the mailing list tomorrow. Please note that the confirmation email might end up in your spam folder. Actually, this is very likely that it will happen. But we will also send you an email with more information on the mailing list and also on the LinkedIn group and a link to that group. And more information about these communication channels you can find at the How to Join page on our website. And now we can go to Agnes.
Hello, everyone. I was in charge in the past few years of Working Group 1 together with Niall Duggan, who acted as a co-chair of this working group, and we plan to continue as chair and co-chair of VG1, which has always had a big and quite diverse membership, diverse in a sense that members come from various disciplines. And to ensure that everyone can find the topics / disciplinary focus of interest to them, we are considering or even proposing the creation of so-called subgroups around the various subtopics of the VG1 themes, which means that such temporary and permanent subgroups could organize, for example, special issues, edited volumes, conference panels, online workshops around these subtopics that, as I've mentioned, are connected to the main topics of the VG1. This would provide an opportunity for those who would be willing to become more active and organize activities connected to their own interest. I can imagine, for instance, that younger academics would seize this opportunity to gain experience, while more established researchers could use it to broaden the network. So that would be overall idea. The most active groups, of course, may eventually become standalone groups later on. They can try access funding through grant applications, for instance, but the framework provided by CHERN and VG1 will be useful to get things started. So during this half an hour VG meetings, which we will have in the breakout rooms later, the aim would be to brainstorm what topics subgroups could be considered, who would be willing to manage each of these, and how the VG1 or CHERN itself could facilitate at least the initial steps. So this would be the plan. And now I hand over to VG2 and to Tim.
Hello, thank you so much, Agnes. I hope you can hear me well. Before I say 2 words about Working Group 2, which has changed its name, I also want to take this opportunity with all the people in the room to thank a couple of colleagues who have been doing incredible work in facilitating the work of all the working groups. I think sort of centrally that is, of course, Anna and Jeff, but it's also Jelena and Alexandra. I appreciate that a lot. I think other VGs and members of the working groups do as well. So I just thought to take this opportunity with all the people in the room. Now to future plans, where we again rely, of course, on all of your help and your kindness. The idea is to get a bit more focused than in the previous, in sort of CHERN 1.0. Working Group 2 used to focus on this broad area of high technology and innovation. Now we would narrow it down a bit to digital technology policy. To be honest, it reflects a bit sort of the focus that the working group had before already, but it's also the idea to be a bit more clear about what to expect and what not. So in topic-wise, we should discuss in the breakout session just as Working Group 1, but I think the idea is to look a bit critically from different angles onto the geopolitical and geoeconomic rivalry between the US and China and where this leaves us in the field of digital technology in Europe, be that on 5G and soon to come 6G, be it advanced semiconductors, critical raw materials, the entire story about gallium and germanium, or data governance, development of AI. And I think the idea would be to have this sort of rather broad sort of an economic competitiveness pillar, looking at security, dependencies, the whole discussion on economic security. That would be sort of roughly the aim, but of course it depends on the specific interests of the members of the working group. In terms of the activities, let me say that before I wrap up. The idea is to have at least 4 webinars a year, but it depends, of course, a bit also on the interest and the engagement of the working group members. As a working group leader, you can facilitate work, but in the end, it depends on sort of also the enthusiasm of you who are participating. A suggestion could be that 2 of these meetings, we could also invite European policymakers, as this group should, try to facilitate policy making, the policy making discussion, but it should, of course, also be open to more academic research. So the aim would also to have 2 webinars where we discuss sort of more internally ongoing research ideas, stuff that's not finished, where we may want to have some input. On a final note, we have been collaborating with Digital Power China, a research consortium that consists half of engineers and technical experts and half of China scholars. And the idea is to keep up that cooperation. But I'm looking forward to discuss your interests and what kind of activities you want to do in the coming months and years in the breakout session. And with that, I hand over to Nick. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Tim, and hello everybody. It's great to see so many familiar faces and a number of unfamiliar ones as well. It's always an encouraging sign. And I'll add my thanks as well to all my colleagues on the steering group, both intellectually and organisationally, putting this together and making my task a relatively simple one, much easier than it might have been. So as Nana mentioned, I have been leading Working Group 3 for the past few years, along with Anna Lupina Wegener, who's been code lead. We are both going to be stepping aside, in my case, to start a new group, which I will talk about in a second. But that does mean that we will be sort of looking for new leadership for Working Group 3, and I'll stay on in a kind of caretaker capacity for the time being. So when we do go into breakout rooms in a moment, those of you who are interested either in finance or energy, please do join my group and we'll kind of try and talk about both of those together. But in any case, just to give you a bit of a flavour of what Working Group 3 has been about, of course, this is a pretty broad terrain, but a number of different sort of research agendas have kind of come through as things that have particularly interested the members of the group over the last few years. So those have included things like banking, renminbi internationalization, infrastructure and development bank financing. Of course, with a number of these, there is an overlap with some of the other groups as well, and we've had some collaborations, hope to continue those. And also, particularly in the last few years, and this relates to what I'll talk about in a second, green finance as well. We also had the project on real estate and migration, along with Working Group 5. And Working Group 3 has also become a kind of home within CHERN for some theoretical work around state capitalism as well. So that's kind of what we have been doing. That isn't meant to limit what might happen in future. So obviously keen to hear ideas from those of you who want to participate in the breakout room about directions for future. And that means both in terms of research agendas, but also in terms of potential future activities, what group members might want to do, in terms of things like, of course, funding, conference panels, workshops, collaborative publications. I think one thing I've been particularly happy with in Working Group 3 is we've done pretty well, I think, in giving a platform to early career researchers, and I'd like to sort of strengthen that aspect of it if possible. So we can talk about that and anything else you would like to discuss also. And okay, now if you could maybe move on the slide and I'll talk about the new group. Right, so so I will be moving. This just reflects my shift in some of my own work, starting a new working group, which will be, as the title says, on energy, right? So transition, extraction, and resources. I mean, you only have to look at the headlines today about wildfires in California. Clearly, climate change is becoming, even more pressing than it was as a global issue. And I guess the kind of initial rationale for this group was partly thinking about the fact that the EU and China, along with the US, are likely the kind of two actors on the world stage that are going to have to play, the biggest role if we are going to have any chance of avoiding catastrophic climate change. So that's a sort of initial point for this. But clearly, there's a lot to say about Europe and China's role in this. Now that means Europe in China, China in Europe, things like EDF's interests in China, say state grids involvement in Portugal's energy, but beyond that, sort of primary energy production, do want to think about this in broad terms. So that means both in terms of sort of the extended value chain, so thinking about things like critical minerals, which have already been mentioned, say cattle battery factories in Hungary, thinking also about fossil fuel production too still. So, Chinese financed fossil fuel projects in the Balkans, for example, but also broadening in the sense of what Giles alluded to, which is to think about the focus of the group as being not just China and Europe, but also kind of the ways in which Europe and China might cooperate or compete on the global stage. So that might be around things like COP negotiations, but it also might be things like critical minerals in third countries, or nuclear or energy infrastructure, all these sorts of things. Of course, we are still starting this group, so it's very open at the moment in terms of focus, and ultimately I want this to be driven by group members rather than just me. But these are a few ideas to kind of throw in initially. All that I said about Working Group 3 in terms of potential activities is sort of open, and we will discuss what we want to do, what we want to prioritize. But also, I think in the discussion that we have, I want to talk a bit about, ways in which we can try and build this group, right? So what sort of other networks and groups do we need to kind of interface and connect with? Who should we be kind of talking to and involving in terms of speakers? And generally, what is going to be the best way to sort of build this going forward? So I will leave it there. Look forward to speaking to a number of you in the breakout rooms, and I will hand over to Agata.
Yes, thanks a lot, and sorry about my coughing, but I also got a bad cold. So, yeah, first of all, a very, very big thank you to the whole what used to be called core group. So, very, very much help, and it was just gorgeous. So, I enjoyed it so much, and I think all working group members did so as well. The working group is still called Public Diplomacy and Knowledge Production, but I have the intention to rename it, as I sense a shift from public diplomacy rather towards narratives and media. A volume is coming out very soon, actually in the next 2 months, that we co-edited with my co-coordinator Magnus Feldman and 2 other colleagues, Duncan Freeman and Stephen Langenong, and it has turned out to be a very hot topic here. So I think in the future it deserves a bit more attention from outside. So that's one bit. Second bit is that we have initiated the so-called CHERN online briefings. You can take a look on the website. These are briefings, basically very short summaries of research results, to make them accessible for media and policymakers. And it seems to be quite successful. It's gaining attention. So we definitely want to work much more on that. And a third point I want to make, but all these will be elaborated on further in the working group session. So I do think it's very, very important to work further on knowledge production. So that will remain as one of the foci, and especially the way we can or should, or I don't know, conduct research on China in Europe. It seems to be a very burning issue for several of us, actually, and just a tiny thing to show how dramatic the situation is. Here in Germany, where I'm based, people who are understanders of China, China-Versteher, this concept has a derogatory undertone. So it means you are a friend of the Communist Party. So there is a lot to talk about, and I do hope that the working group members will continue to contribute. There is a lot to do. Join me in the breaking room session, and we can discuss these topics further. Thank you. And Martina, yes.
Yes, thank you, Agota, and hello to everybody also from my side. As you have heard, probably also before, Pal Neri has stepped down as VG leader of Migration and Labor Group, and this role has been now taken over by myself, as I was actively involved in the working group and in the organization of the events, but also in the network through managing STSMs throughout the cost funding years. In this new role, I'm very happy to work together with Elena Barambantseva from University of Manchester, who will act as a working group co-leader. Our focus remains on the topics of migration and mobility between China and Europe, and we are especially keen on identifying the most current phenomena that are changing the landscape of Chinese and Chinese descendants communities in Europe. For instance, one such phenomena is something that Palmyri already started last year with so-called chronology research. So the research on middle-class migration from China to Europe that is driven mostly by values and not so much by economic reasons. Organizationally wise, we will work towards further collaboration with other CHERN working groups, especially with the Working Group 1 and Working Group 3. You have already heard there was in the past research on real estate investments. So anything that is in connection to the human mobility cost or that is causing infrastructure or investment projects. We would also like to deepen the collaboration with other main clusters of researchers working in the field of China-related migration, not only in Europe, especially in Europe, but not only, also in China or let's say in Japan or US, where there are similar networks like on China-related migration. And we have already made some steps in this direction. We envision the group work through interesting virtual events that will take place several times a year, and also through face-to-face meetings, let's say like joint organization of panels or small workshops where funding will be gathered through third-party resources. In addition, we hope that the group will become a site of dynamic exchange on academic funding, possibilities, publication, and events. So I think this is now all working groups.
Yes, and thank you very much for this quick expose of CHERN 2.0. And thank you very much to all the working group leaders for their brilliant work so far and for the enthusiasm and willingness to continue to lead this community. So the future is up to us to shape that and to shape all these activities. We have many ideas and we're committed to organize them, but ultimately we also need the community, the members, to make this happen. So it's extremely encouraging to see this great turnout today, and we warmly invite you to stay connected, get involved if you are not yet, get more involved if you weren't that much involved, join a breakout room. Alexandra will soon explain you how to get more in depth into the activities of one working group. Unfortunately, you can just join one working group and not several. As you know, we often try to also organize cross-cutting activities, and this is something we will keep aiming for. There's a lot on the table for us. There's a lot of things to think through, and we will do so as a steering group, and we will keep you up to date and informed and engaged. We will not return in a plenary mode, so we wave off here as a collective, but we will see you in the breakout rooms and hopefully soon in our upcoming activities. Thank you very much for your attention and your contributions.